Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
Hey, really glad you're with us for the Tuesday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. Yesterday, we had 3 good martinis. Today, our fingernails are pretty short, looking for 1. So we're kind of back to our normal fare today. Good, bad, and crazy still, though. So buckle in for that. The bad one is a double-barreled insanity, and the crazy one's not far behind. So, Jim, let's start with the good, and this is a qualified good. It shouldn't take you 5 months to realize that Hamas was committing mass rape and other sexually based atrocities during the October 7th invasion of Israel, which left, was it like 1,400 Israelis dead, many others injured. There are still hostages. And as Pramila Patten, the UN Special Representative on Sexual Violence in Conflict, reported, now 5 months later, they can confirm that it appears there was rape involved on October 7th, and perhaps more imminently significant, it's still going on against the people in captivity. Here's what she said.
We found clear and convincing information that sexual violence, including rape, sexualized torture, cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment, has been committed against captives. And we also have reasonable grounds to believe that such violence may still be ongoing against those still held in captivity.
So, Jim, again, this would have been nice to have confirmed by the UN really 5 months ago, because we were seeing it, unfortunately, in real time on social media and so forth. I don't know if this will change the UN's hostility towards Israel overall and so forth, but at least getting them to acknowledge basic facts, I guess, qualifies as a good martini here.
Yeah, and the past record of the United Nations plays into this a great deal. The degree to which I believe they issue a resolution denouncing Israel. It's every Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays at the UN, it pretty much feels like. Whereas, regimes that have demons resumes, horribly abusive, get to head up the Human Rights Council over at the UN. Like the UN has self-marginalized itself and made itself look ridiculous in so many points that when they don't do that, and yes, this is much later than we would have liked. This is almost, I want to say comic understatement, but like within the first day, we saw posted on social media by Palestinians, by Hamas, that they had, half-naked women who'd had their clothes torn off, bound, being dragged into the back of trucks, on the back of motorcycles, all that kind of stuff, with large groups of guys getting together. What do you think happened? Right? I'm sure every last member of Hamas was a perfect gentleman, and they were very respectable to their, come on, And then we haven't had nearly as many releases of these hostages as we would have liked, but the ones that we had, you had dumb schmucks on Twitter looking, look at the smile on her face. She looks appreciative. It looks like, she must have been treated right. And then, of course, the stories from the captives came out, and it was every bit as horrible as you would have imagined. Sexual violence is a tool of Hamas. They do this, this is part of how they operate. There is no taboo against this. There is no indication that anybody in the ranks of Hamas sees this as morally wrong or a line that you cannot cross. This is who they are. This is how they operate. Thank you, UN, for acknowledging this. And thank you for acknowledging the fact that, when you're like, why isn't Israel doing more to get the hostages out? I mean, I get that argument. But they're always wanting, hundreds or some much higher number of, captured terrorists put back on the streets in order to get these terrorists out. Look, I don't like seeing Gaza children suffer as anybody else, but it's understandable why Israel doesn't want to give an inch to these folks, and they feel their attitude is this military operation does not end until Hamas is destroyed. That's the only way to ensure you don't get another October 7th. It's an ugly fight. I'm not going to, sugarcoat it. I'm not going to say that Israel hasn't done anything that, we in the United States might have second thoughts about. But when you look at the nature of the enemy and what the enemy is doing, it's a component you cannot ignore. And I'm glad that the UN, which is, we're used to seeing trip over its own shoelaces on this, very slowly did come to the correct conclusion and noted that, Hamas has not, this was a thing that just happened in the first couple days and things have calmed down now. This is a continuing operation. This is who these guys are. And it's very hard to begrudge Israel for not wanting to hit these guys with everything they've got.
Yeah, let's not pretend the UN's going to change its overall position on the conflict. I assume they're still going to demonize Israel here, but just getting them to admit this after this much time is kind of significant, not only about what happened then, but what is still happening now. And so we'll take it. From the UN, this is a good martini, where we usually don't find many at all. All right, let's talk about 4Patriots. Right now, you can go to 4patriots.com/martini, where you can get great deals like a free solar panel with the purchase of the Patriot Power Generator 2000X and free shipping on orders over $97. But the most important thing when thinking about 4Patriots is being prepared, being ready in case the unexpected happens. Do you want to be sitting in the dark or maybe even the cold for hours or days if the power unexpectedly goes out? You don't have to by getting the Patriot Power Generator 2000X. It's got double the capacity of the previous generators, and it's expandable so you can run big appliances while your power is out. Your fridge, your freezer, all that food not going to waste because you've got this generator. That would be fantastic. Also, of course, never needs gas because it comes with that solar panel. Visit 4patriots.com/martini to get your Patriot Power Generator 2000X with free solar panel included. Plus, get free shipping on orders over $97. Save more and get peace of mind now by going to the number 4patriots.com/martini. That's 4patriots.com/martini. All right, Jim, on to our bad martini, and this is a double-fisted bad to be sure. The Daily Mail is the first one I've seen with this particular story. And so often, it's odd how foreign media outlets get breaking news like this compared to our outlets based in Washington that cover the White House. The Biden administration has admitted, not accused, has admitted transporting migrants on secret flights into the U.S. Customs and Border Protection, though, has refused to disclose information about a program secretly arranging flights for thousands of undocumented immigrants from foreign airports directly to U.S. cities. It means that while record numbers of migrants were flowing over the southern border last year, the Biden White House was also directly transporting them into the country. Use of a cell phone app allowed for the near undetected arrival by air of 320,000 aliens with no legal rights to enter the United States. Here's the rub. Included in the details of a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit, first reported by Todd Bensman, the Center for Immigration Studies found that Biden's Customs and Border Protection approved the latest secretive flights that transported hundreds of thousands of illegal immigrants from foreign countries into at least 43 different American airports from January through December 2023. That's just last year. We'll have another outrage before we finish this martini. But Jim, this is basically human trafficking. They're going to probably claim that they may have processed these people. But if you're actually trying to secure the border, you wouldn't be flying people with no legal right to come here into the country to kind of pad down your numbers at the river.
Yeah, look, the very first question is why would you have this program in the first place? Why would look, a lot of people have a hard time getting across the border illegally. So we in the Biden administration, we're going to set up a system of flights to make it easier for them to get into the country illegally. And we'll cover the costs. Don't worry. Next time your flight is delayed, wonder if it's one of these Biden flights coming in that's screwing up the airports or something like that. I'm going to allude to this to our second part of Martini here, but it would be one thing if the country were having this influx of migrants that are putting a strain on resources, really coast to coast. Every major city, New York City, it's not just a border state problem anymore. It would be one thing if the Biden administration had a plausible case of saying, hey, we're doing the best we can. There's just so many people. There's just such an influx. The border is so long. There's only so much we can do. That doesn't hold water when you see stories like this and the one we're going to see in the next one. It's very clear this is an administration that has not pulled out all the stops. In fact, on day one, they undid a whole bunch of the stops, and we're in the situation we're in now. This program just seems utterly baffling, and the scale of this program and the desire to bring, and then the fact that parts that they still won't release as part of the Freedom of Information Act request, also deeply troubling. And so we're just kind of left with this question of why is the Biden administration doing what it can to make it easier for these people to get into the country instead of making it harder for them to get into the country?
No, it's exactly right. And remember that on Thursday night when he tries to pretend he's the tough guy who's serious about securing the border in his State of the Union speech. And if only it weren't for those dastardly Republicans who refused to go for the Senate bill. But there's more. On Sunday, on 60 Minutes, there was a conversation with the former chief of U.S. Customs and Border Protection. His name is Raul Ortiz, who just retired in 2023, had the job for 2 years, And here's what he told 60 Minutes.
I've never had one conversation with the president or the vice president for that matter. And so I was the chief of the Border Patrol. I commanded 21,000 people. That's a problem.
And until Biden was there last week, reportedly he hadn't talked to the new border chief. So that's going on about 3 years, basically almost the entire presidency of Joe Biden, where he hadn't talked to the border chief. And we have this amazing technology now, Jim. It's called a telephone. You can even do video conferencing like we're doing right now as we record the podcast, and all sorts of different things. The president's got access to a lot of different cool tools, but apparently just too darn busy to deal with the guy who's the point man for the biggest rush of humanity at our border in history.
You know, there's GChat, Facebook Messenger. There's all kinds of ways that the president and Raul Ortiz could have talked. Look, two things jump out about this. The first is Saturday Night Live's opening sketch this past weekend was about the phenomenon in which members of the administration, Democratic officials, will say, oh, when you can't see Biden, he's so full of energy. Oh, my goodness, he's so busy. He's getting so much done. He was doing cartwheels down the hall. You know, it's just when the camera's on, he looks frail and old and out of it. And I thought it was very intriguing that SNL was making that sketch. But for 3 years now, I have remarked about the light schedule Biden has by traditional presidential standards. Usually one event a day in public, only on weekdays, rarely before 10 a.m., rarely after 4 or 5 p.m., weekends at the home in Delaware. If he goes on a foreign trip, he spends at least a day, sometimes more than a day, resting. Look, this is all what you'd expect for a guy who's 81 years old. And the idea, and so one of the other things you said, look, Biden is always president, and he's always having meetings, and he's always, well, he wasn't talking with Raul Ortiz, who's running in charge of the Border Patrol. And, you know, if you, 1 week, okay, fine, I don't expect him to be meeting with him, you know, every Tuesday. But nothing in more than 2 years? Really? Not, as you mentioned, not even a phone call, not even a conference call. No point they interact. And then the other one, not Kamala Harris, the so-called border czar. Now, I know they say, oh, well, she wasn't a border czar. She was in charge of Central American migration. Okay, where are they coming through from? Through the border. Like, this looks like as I alluded to a moment ago, this looks like an administration that the most generous way you could interpret their attitude towards the border was benign neglect. It ended up being very malign neglect, but the attitude was, this is not a popular issue. Our base doesn't want us to do anything regarding immigration enforcement. They want to abolish ICE. We're just going to pretend it's not happening. We're going to focus on Bidenflation and snack bags, and there's too much air in the snack bags, and all. We're going to talk about every other topic except the border and immigration. Well, lo and behold, when you ignore it for the better part of 3 years, it rockets up to either be the top priority of American voters or it's like number two, and rising very fast. So what we're hearing from Ortiz is kind of confirming the vibe we've gotten from this administration, that it just didn't look like it was very interested in it. But somebody also put out, you think about all the different times there were controversies on the border, including remember the infamous they were whipping the Haitians photo, which was in fact a misinterpretation of a photo. Yes, the guy used it, he's whipping his horse. He's not whipping the Haitians. The photographer said there was no whipping of the Haitians. And yet the one time Biden came out there and we're going to get to the bottom of this and we're going to hold them accountable. And then like 8 months it went on. And lo and behold, they confirmed, no, there was no whipping of any Haitians. This was just the way that, the angle of the photo was. That's what it takes to get Biden interested in it is, this misinformation, this lie. And that gets him interested. The actual crisis at the border doesn't get him interested and doesn't get him coming out. And I think the argument that he did not have a single conversation, neither he nor Harris, really makes us wonder, what is the president doing when we're not seeing him? Because this claim that he's doing cartwheels down the hall and he's so full of energy, he's doing so many, no, I think he's just sitting there. I think he's just sitting around and probably watching Matlock reruns.
Yeah. Talking to Mayorkas all day, who's more than happy to watch the status quo. You mentioned benign neglect. I think when you look at the first half of our Bad Martini today, that's not benign. Actively bringing in over 300,000 people, flying them over the border because you don't want their numbers added to the total, and perhaps other reasons for relocation. That seems pretty darn intentional. You'll also notice, Jim, I'm sure you noticed yesterday, Biden's entire schedule was receiving the presidential daily briefing, which happens every single day. With the State of the Union coming up on Thursday, I'm not saying he won't be in public at all until Thursday night, but I bet that schedule is going to be real quiet.
Yeah, and his last event in the public was Friday afternoon, meeting with the Italian prime minister. People say, Jim, doesn't Biden deserve the weekends off? Okay, or most presidents probably don't do a ton on weekends. But the fact that Biden spends almost every weekend back in Delaware Very rarely does stuff on the weekend. And then we have this, where there's nothing on Monday. I haven't checked today, but my understanding is that much. You're right. He's probably not likely to do much of anything before the State of the Union address Thursday night. It's going to be a big deal. Usually the State of the Union, I think, is very boring and uninteresting and really doesn't have any consequences. In the case of this, how does Biden look? God forbid he trips and stumbles going down the aisle on the way to the podium, or loses his place and kind of looks out of it. Like that could have very big consequences. So conceivably, in the context of the presidential race, maybe the State of the Union is going to be meaningful. And I understand why Biden would want to be rested up. I'm sure they're going to have him with 8 cups of coffee and wanting him to be raring to go at, is it usually start at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock?
9 o'clock.
Eastern time.
Yeah.
Oh, God, I got to stay up till 9? Anyway.
No, you got to stay up till like 10:30. By the way, everyone.
Yeah.
Check
live
out
blogging at both National Review and the Washington Post. And I'll bet you're looking forward to it as much as I am. The consequences to this one could be bigger, but I think the result is that you won't have anything done. So basically between Friday and Thursday evening, there's a good chance we will not see the president in a re-election year. Oh, yeah, that's normal.
Yes, which means he might be well rested up and prepped enough to not trip all over himself. And then at that point, the media and Democrats will be like, see, he's fine. And Republicans have this habit of predicting Biden is going to get tongue-tied and lose his place and everything. They did that with the debates and the convention speech even back in 2020. What they should be doing is talking about how great Biden was as a debater or was as an orator, and then set those expectations as opposed to, if he's probably just going to drool all over himself. And then when he doesn't, it's, he's fine. Republicans overreacting again.
Let me put it this way. Considering how Biden has been, the bar has been lowered so low, metaphorically, that Biden could clear it literally. That physically he could clear this bar. It's worth noting, and again, for the Trump years, Trump would, go crazy on social media, and then he'd go and give the State of the Union, and for one night we would get good behavior Trump. And Trump would stick to the teleprompter, and he'd pay tribute to Buzz Alt, and he'd do all these things that were not raging and frothing at the mouth. And remember people say, wow, tonight Donald Trump we would see the very best of Trump. And then within 24 to 48 hours, he'd be screaming about somebody on social media and it would be all back to normal. So recognize, in the end, the State of the Union is not a high degree of difficulty. It's not a debate where you have to think on your feet. You just have to read from the teleprompter. Your party is going to jump out of your seats and applaud like seals every time you pause to clear your throat. And then, the cursed position of the response to the State of the Union will be given by a Republican, and probably a baby grand piano will drop on them, like Doug from Emo the Lebu or something. Like Rubio, Jindal, everybody. There's an old gypsy curse on giving the response to the State of the Union. Something terrible will happen. I feel bad for Katie Britt. She's the Alabama senator who's supposed to give very talented, very promising future in the party that will probably be cut short by this speech because it always turns out badly for everyone. Because the president is always giving, in the most elaborate, place imaginable. And the Republican response is usually given into a room talking into a camera. It never works as well.
Yeah, just a couple of quick pieces of advice. Stay well hydrated before your rebuttal.
Yes.
There's Senator Britt, and no staircases. Just gonna put those two out there. So staging does matter. Don't let people be distracted. All right, Jim, on to our crazy martini now. And you and I have made it very, very clear over the past, nearly 8 years now, that we have nothing but disdain for the Lincoln Project. But there's more evidence all the time about why we feel that way. And the Lincoln Project and some folks over at the Bulwark are now setting their howitzers on no labels, which at this point doesn't appear to be a factor because everybody who's even been lightly rumored to be a no labels candidate has declined to be a no labels candidate, from Joe Manchin to Nikki Haley to Larry Hogan, who's now running for Senate. But that doesn't mean that Never Trump folks have not been putting the pressure on. Byron York with the reporting here. He says, meanwhile, Rick Wilson, co-founder of the Lincoln Project, another organization actively working to prevent no labels from exercising its constitutional rights, posted a tweet with an accompanying video on April 6th of last year, arguing that no labels and its leaders, quote, need to be burned to the bleeping ground politically. He did not bleep itself. If you ever read his tweets, you know that's the case. And then more recently, over at the Bulwark, you've got Jonathan Last, formerly of the Weekly Standard, but now at the Bulwark and on the Bulwark podcast, December 27th, 2023. So just a couple of months ago. He said that, quote, anybody who participates in this no labels malarkey should have their lives ruined, while at least conceding they should not, quote, have violence visited upon them. He called for anyone affiliated with thank you. He called for anyone affiliated with no labels to, quote, become social pariahs, adding, quote, they should lose whatever jobs they might have. They should be kicked off corporate boards. And if people are going to act irresponsibly like this, they should be absolutely shamed to our society's utmost ability to shame. It's always the people who love democracy that are threatening to ruin the lives of people who want to participate in democracy.
We're going to burn their houses to the ground. Yes. In order to stop hatred and political extremism, people need to be driven out of decent society. We need to, so very revealing statements here. First of all, like if you're running around saying that we need to go out and ruin people's lives and touch grass, just talk to ordinary Americans. Realize like you don't need to be filled with a seething hatred of everybody who thinks differently than you, particularly if you think you're standing up for democracy and decency and tolerance and all that stuff. Secondly, I think it's very revealing that the Lincoln Project and some folks over at the Bulwark see no labels as such a threat. Because look, we don't know who no label right now. No labels is no candidates, right? We don't. It's do you want Trump, Biden, or whoever's behind door number 3? We conceivably. And I was at an event with Nikki Haley last Friday. She really slammed the door on this. She said if she joins no labels, it means the campaign is about her. She also said she would not be able to function with a Democratic vice president because she thinks there would just be too many disagreements there. Could she walk that back? I suppose, but that was a really, pretty clear indication this is not something she wants to do. But I'm not convinced that no labels will end up hurting Biden more than Trump if you were to nominate. Like what we're seeing through these primaries is that, there's about 25 to 40% of the Republican Party that isn't comfortable with Trump. If no labels gives them a sufficiently conservative option, they could get a whole bunch of those votes. I'm not saying a ton, probably not enough to, probably not enough to win probably not even enough to be more than third in any state. But they could tip it that way. And I just think it's interesting that like these folks who are at this point passionately, rabidly pro-Biden. Boy, let me tell you, it's one thing to be anti-Trump, another thing to be pro-Biden. Like the reaction to these folks is that if you are in this big chunk of Americans, myself included, where you look at Trump, you're like, ugh. You look at Biden, you're like, no, thank you. I've had enough of this stuff. I could use other words and stuff. To the Jonathan Lasts and the Lincoln Project crowd, you're part of the problem. How dare you? How dare you think we can do better than Biden? How dare you want some other better option? Which I think is just, from where I'm sitting, that's just off the wall. In my mind, every vote's got to be earned. You don't owe your vote to anybody. Today's Super Tuesday. I just voted. If you Americans, listeners to this podcast, first of all, whether or not your state is having primaries today, I hope you have a Super Tuesday. Second of all, let's just recognize that if you don't like any of these, you don't have to vote for them. They have to be. Their job is to appeal to you. Their job is they owe you. You don't owe them your vote. But anyway, there's this mentality that no labels has got to be destroyed. I mean, keep in mind, you're still going to have RFK in a bunch of states and on a bunch of ballots. Cornel West, I keep referring to, apparently he's not running as the Green Party's candidate. He's running as an independent candidate. I don't know who's going to get the Green Party's candidate. They're not exactly the most well-known figures to begin with. But they're going to be third and fourth party candidates peeling away, support from the two major candidates as is. And the Democrats made their choice to go with an 81-year-old man who is struggling. And Republicans, assuming today shakes out the way everybody expects, are extremely likely to go with a guy who lost the last presidential election, has January 6th, has the whole crazy conspiracy theories and all the other, baggage going with him. So why is it so crazy for somebody to say, nah, I want a third option. I want somebody else. And if if is that person likely to win? No, extremely unlikely to win. Maybe there's a Perot factor. Perot got 9% in 96, 19% in 92. We'll see how things shake out. But like this idea that if you dare want some third option, you're an enemy of democracy. First of all, to preserve democracy, they have to take away options and put people to vote.
Yes.
Democracy dies in darkness unless somebody shoots it with a machine gun in the middle of the day and, Like the Florida Democratic Party is saying, yeah, we're just not going to have a primary this year. We're just giving it to Biden. I'm not saying that Dean Phillips is a whirling dervish of raw political charisma. But when you're a declared candidate and the Florida Democratic Party is like, yeah, we're just not going to pretend you don't exist. That doesn't strike me as democracy. And you can't say, well, in order to save democracy, we have to skip elections. No, that's not how any of this works. It's not how any of this works. Anyway, is it Friday yet, Greg?
Yeah, if you go back and look at Rick Wilson's tweets about Biden in the 2012 campaign, when Obama and Biden were running for re-election against Romney and Ryan, his opinion of Joe Biden was significantly different back when Biden had significantly more faculties. And so if he was still on the Republican side, he would be mocking Joe Biden to the hilt right now.
Apparently he was senile then, but he's gotten better now.
Yes. More than a decade
The first
later.
man to go to reverse Alzheimer's, apparently. Yeah.
Rick Wilson basically became known as a guy who could play smash mouth politics in a street fight. And I'm sure he hates Trump for a lot of reasons, but I think one of the reasons he hates him but will never admit it is because Trump's better at smash mouth street fighting politics than Rick Wilson. And when they went head to head in 2016, Trump beat him.
Well, let's just also observe the lesson of the Lincoln Project is that when you see Trump emerging and you don't like his populist instincts, his demagogic instincts, his disregard for the Constitution, his just general erraticism, that you can take a stand for your country, for what you believe is right, separate from partisanship, and you can get a vacation home in Aspen out of it. And that is... As it wasn't one of the lawsuits, somebody at the Lincoln Project said this is our option, this is our opportunity for generational wealth. I mean, there are a lot of people who can't stand Donald Trump and who want to pay to figure out some way to beat him. And all of these guys, including I used to be good terms with Stu. I don't hate Stu Stevens. I just don't see the world the way he does anymore. And these guys had a record success in state and congressional and lower, not great record in presidential races, but fine. If you're a Republican presidential consultant from 2008 and 2012, you're going up against a generational talent. And you just was, you look back and you realize McCain might have had a shot, and then the Great Recession kicked off, Wall Street meltdown, and there was just no way voters were going to say, give me 4 more years of Republicans. And then you got Romney, except you've got the first African-American president, going for a second term. And it was just always going to be a very challenging race in both those cycles. So anyway, that's where we are. And but man, Lincoln Project, like they've figured out, this is you can make an enormous amount of money by convincing people that you're the ones who are tough and standing up against Trump. And every once in a while, they would come up with a smart, they would run ads. Last cycle, they ran ads on DC television. Now, there are not a lot of swing voters in the Washington, D.C. market, but Trump saw them, and Trump would jump on social media and tweet about it and rage, and that would just be free advertising for the Lincoln Project. Credit them for occasionally coming up with smart things like that. But in the end, was that smart for beating Trump, or was that smart for getting more donations to the Lincoln Project? Happy Super Tuesday, Greg.
Indeed. Same to you, Jim. Good luck. If you have a primary in your state, go ahead and vote, and we'll see what happens tomorrow. I'm sure it's going to be lopsided all over the place, but nonetheless, go out there and vote. And some states have other things on the ballot. I think it's primary day in Texas, for example, and a lot of big races going on there. So, Jim, have a great day. He's Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Columbus, Radio America. Thanks for being with us today. Please subscribe to the 3 Martini Lunch if you don't already, and tell your friends about us as well. Thanks also for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us both on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Dateline_DC. Have a great Tuesday and join us on Wednesday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.